Hello, podcast family. My name is Justin Weidenfeld, and I'm going to be your grief financial officer on the journey that is the Currency of Grief podcast. This podcast is designed to share real life stories from real life people who have navigated the intersection of grief and money and all the intricacies that come with death, loss, and legacy. My goal with this podcast is to inspire you to have deeper conversations with your loved ones and family members around the fragility of life, to normalize family conversations around money and legacy, and to help educate around something that's inevitable for all of us, our mortality. I'm excited to be your guide on this journey and hope that you take valuable lessons away from our guests and their stories. Without further ado, let's meet today's guest on the podcast. Today's guest is Bill Solominsky. He's the founder of the Reluctant Executor. And Bill and I met through a mutual colleague off of a networking event. And that colleague said, "Hey, Justin, you'd benefit from meeting Bill and having a conversation with him. I think you'd get along. You're playing around in the same space." And then we met for coffee in Austin, and the rest is history. So I'm super honored and privileged to have you, Bill, on this podcast and to share your story and give advice and tips about for maybe some people who are going through something that you went through as well. So, Bill, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I'm happy to be here and help out.
Of course. So, Bill, I gave you a little bit of an intro, but tell our audience, tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
So let's go back from before we met. So my background before I got into this space was actually as an engineer and marketing professional. So worked a lot in tech companies, high tech companies, doing product marketing, helping communicate the stories of what was being built, helping really explain that and really understanding what the customers were going through, what their needs were, and that helped me develop hone in my skills on listening, on really being able to listen to people. And I'm mentioning that because you may wonder how you go from a career in high tech marketing to something where you help families through part of it, probably the most difficult time of their lives. And it's not just a natural transition, but there are a lot of skill sets that I was able to take away from that background, from my experience, to apply it to the to this new role. So, like I said, lots of experience in marketing and engineering and high tech companies. Just like on a personal side, grew up in Pittsburgh, moved to Austin, probably about 20 years ago. And big sports fan, obviously, really, really big fan of Steelers, Pirates, Penguins, Pittsburgh sports teams, and still involved with sports with my kids. Both of them are playing soccer and swim. And basketball. So, really involved in kind of those activities and really being active around being a fan, which is pretty fun.
Amazing. So it sounds like you're not only a professional, but also a father and a coach. And it sounds like you also use those listening skills in basically every aspect of your life.
Yeah, glad you mentioned coach, because I did coach my kids in soccer for a few years, and we'll get to this later probably, but my dad, who passed away a couple years ago, was also a coach. He was a teacher as well as coaching wrestling for I think over 20 years, and so I think a lot of those skills, a lot of that ability to or the want to help other people out in whatever way it is, if it's through athletics, if it's through other areas, is something that's kind of carried on. That I've tried to carry on.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and what was childhood like in Pittsburgh?
colder than Austin.
No wonder
No,
you
it was,
moved.
yeah, no, it was. I mean, it was great. It was kind of standard. Grew up on about 35 acres, so was able to go outside and you know, as a kid, play games out in the woods and just being outside a lot. Um, just you know, nothing super crazy. Again, lots of activities. I did play multiple sports growing up. My dad was very involved with those as a parent, not so much as a coach. I mentioned he coached wrestling. I played soccer my whole life. He didn't know anything about soccer, but I do remember him being at all my practices, all my games. We would go to tournaments in the area um, for uh, for the soccer teams. So definitely, you know, kind of a big part of, well, when you're a kid, you don't, you know, you kind of want to be on your own, right? But looking back on it, that's when you kind of really appreciate it. And so, again, no matter what my kids think about me being at events, at their events now, I think, you know, they'll look back and hopefully appreciate it.
Yeah, it sounds like your dad instilled in you the kind of presence and the guidance that it's so important to just be present at those big events and to make time for them.
Not even big events, small events also.
You're right. Well, at that age, right, every event is like a big event. And I can remember like my dad coaching my baseball games, and I just felt like every event, every game was like, just this is the moment. This is so exciting, and to have your dad, your family there, it's so impactful.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, definitely. Like I said, especially looking back on it and just looking at how he was there as a parent, as a dad, and didn't really heavy handedly try to coach or anything. As I mentioned, he didn't know much about soccer when I started. He he wrestled in college. He coached wrestling. Was involved in a really major uh, um, wrestling event in Pittsburgh since its founding in
Mm-hmm.
the, I think, late '70s. But when I started wrestling, he basically let the coaches take over, right? You know, and them teach me. So, you know, definitely, as I've experienced coaching my kids, that's something to really appreciate, the way that he was able to balance being a parent and cheering on your kid versus you know, really pushing them and really, you know, having to say how to do things versus just
Sure.
enjoying the moment.
I think the hardest part of coaching that age group is dealing with the parents and not the kids.
I've experienced that.
um, all right. Well, what we do here on the Currency of Grief podcast is really dive in and get vulnerable. So I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about your grief story.
Sure. So, as you can probably guess, this was about my dad. He uh, in October of 2020 called me. Actually, he texted me. We usually text back and forth, and he actually texted me and asked if I had a minute to talk. So I was like, "This is a little bit odd. What's going on?" Called him back, and he told me that he had been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And so obviously that prognosis is not good. Looking at you know, survival rates after, you know, so many years. So that was kind of surprising, that he had been a smoker earlier in his life, but he hadn't smoked for like 30 years, I think. So, you know, of all the kind of health problems you go through older as you get older, that one was, you know, kind of, I think, surprising that that's what that's what it was. Um, and so, as I mentioned, I'm in Austin, Texas now. My parents were still in Pittsburgh, and I ended up flying up there, and just to, you know, obviously to be there with this type of news. But I had also realized that I did not know a lot of the details that I thought I would need to know once he passed away to help my mom. And I didn't know what I didn't know, but I was going to go find out. And so I made sure I took my laptop. As I mentioned, I'm an engineer, so I'm kind of a spreadsheet guy. One of the days that I was up there, just had both him and my mom sitting down in the living room and opened up my spreadsheet, blank spreadsheet. And I'm like, what do I need to know? And again, started just with some of the basics that I could think about like, what bills, thing, like basically money was the first thing that came to mind. I started thinking about bills, and they had always been transparent with money, but I didn't know the details, like all the specific accounts they had, maybe credit cards they had, how things may have been linked together, how they actually paid for things, if they still wrote a check, if they did online accounts, if they did have access to online stuff. So basically, I just sat there and started asking questions, started talking. One of the interesting things about that I remember about that conversation is my dad's, both of my parents had paintings from a local Pittsburgh area artist. These things may have been worth $100, couple $100, nothing like, no Picassos or anything super crazy, but my dad kept on wanting to go and talk about those paintings and just say like, well, don't forget we have these here, these here, these here. And I'm like, okay, I got that. I know they're not, valuable monetarily. Maybe there is something important to you about that. That's what, I'd like to understand that. But I did find myself steering the conversation back to what I thought was important, which again was more around what I thought my mom did not know that I'd have to help her with afterwards. So, so we had that conversation. Honestly, I don't remember how long it took. I, want to say maybe an hour or two. It wasn't an all day type of thing, and we didn't spend multiple days on it. Spent the rest of the time, just visiting and just kind of what you do, right? Whenever you get that kind of news. And so that was October 2020. I was able to go up there a couple more times to visit. And then in summer of 2022, he ended up passing away. And so it was about a year and a half was all the time after that diagnosis. And after he passed away, I was able to pull out that spreadsheet, and it actually was very useful to a degree. There were a lot of things that happened, which I think we'll get into later, that popped up that my mom and I did not account for. But I think I captured probably at least 60, 70% of what was useful, or of what we needed for after the fact. And so one of the things that was where I was fortunate was that it was not sudden. We did have time to prepare, to talk about things. He was not in a state, especially early on, where he could not answer questions. There wasn't any kind of dementia or anything like that. Even at the later stages, it was just kind of what cancer does to you. You get sick, you can't really get out of bed and just don't feel good. But he never lost his mental abilities to so if there were any kind of questions, which honestly we didn't want to ask him any kind of questions like that, kind of toward the end, but up until then, that's one thing I look back on, is that we were fortunate in that way to have those conversations after we knew then was coming soon, and not just have those conversations, but be able to coherently to ask questions and have coherent responses and accurate responses back.
Wow, thanks for sharing that story. It sounds like you made the most of the year and a half that you had with him logistically. But also, I mean, what other activities, or were there any other activities that you did emotionally to like make that time valuable?
Yeah, you always look back and I think wish you had done more, right?
Mm.
That's always the fact. One thing that we did do, I did not get up there a ton. Just I mentioned a couple times. I had looked at one point, seeing if he was interested in going to get Penguin tickets on the glass. So just something that was a little bit more special than just going to a game. But by that point, he was already didn't really want to go out anywhere, wasn't feeling healthy enough to do much. But what we did do was I flew up there. Oh god, what year was I think 21, 22. It was either I think it was in 2021. I can't remember right now. It had to have been anyway. Flew up there right before Christmas and um, surprised him by bringing my oldest daughter with me, who at the time was around 9, I think. And so my mom knew that she was coming, but it was a surprise to him. So it was, I think he was, obviously, pleasantly surprised to, uh, not just see me, which, how father son relationships are, right? You can pretend that you don't care to see somebody when you really do. But by bringing my daughter with me, I think that got her a little bit more one-on-one time. Um, just her with herself, but not with her sister, so that there was no fighting or distractions or anything. So I was able to do that in December of that year, which I think was pretty special to. I hope it was special to my dad, and I think my daughter will probably look into that down the road and look back and remember that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It sounds like that time between your daughter and her grandfather was very, very valuable.
Yeah, like I said, she was probably about 9 at the time.
Okay,
So yeah, looking back, hopefully again we have some pictures and stuff, so hopefully it'll be something that you can look back on later and still have some good memories.
for sure. How old was your dad when he passed?
79. He was just
Okay,
a few months shy of his 80th birthday.
got it. So, it sounds like he lived a long, long, fulfilling life. Obviously, living in all kind of across the country was probably difficult. Um, when you heard the news, both of maybe his kind of diagnosis as well as his passing, like what was the first feeling that arose?
Um, yeah, that's hard to think about. I I think there's always like what's the standard, like kind of denial, or just my first instinct was to do as much research as I could about what was going on. I wanted to understand everything, like what are the survival rates? What's it really mean? What's a stage 4 really mean? Um, was it a misdiagnosis? What else could it have been? Just kind of all those things I think were going through my head at that point. Um, but like as I talked to him longer, it was like yeah, this is what it is. There's nothing you
Mhm.
can. I think he had already done a lot of that research, like knew about survival rates and stuff. Um, so yeah, that was my first instinct to really. I don't know if that's more denial versus just wanting to understand the complete picture, total situation, what options
Definitely.
there are. Um, asked about the doctors he's seeing. What they're close to Pittsburgh, which has a great medical center. So, are there any kind of clinical trials? Is there any need or any chance that it would be better if you went to Cleveland Clinic, which is still close? Is MD Anderson in Houston? Is anything like that? But as time went on, as we talked more, it kind of was more of a this is this is what it is. The we're going to go through, or he's going to go through the chemotherapy and see what happens, and kind of ride it out from there. So yeah, so he did to go through a chemo treatment or a chemo schedule plan, whatever it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Um, had some ups and downs, obviously, but uh, yeah, like, and yeah, throughout that whole time, just trying to understand the differences, nuances of different types of lung cancer, and just diving in to get more research of things that I never thought I would ever look into before.
Right. Mm.
Yeah. And so when he did pass away, yeah, like we saw it coming for a couple weeks because he was taking a turn, and especially the night before, or on the phone with my mom, and it was just, yeah, not looking good. So, wasn't much of a shock, but was still obviously extremely sad. Right,
Yeah.
that's kind of the first sorrow. It was like the first thing. Um, yeah, surprise was not my first reaction. It was, I think, yeah, more like, oh well, this is okay. Now what? Now what do I need to do to help my mom? I gotta, I started thinking about the logistics. Need to, tell my family, tell my kids. And I do remember it was a Saturday morning. Like, my mom had called. It was something like 6:30 in the morning, 7 in the morning. I'm like, this is like, I knew right when I saw it was caller ID that what it was. And my kids had a swim meet that day.
Mm.
So my wife and I were like, let's just hold off. Let's let them swim. You figure out your flights and everything while we're at the swim meet. And then after the swim meet's done, because we didn't know how they were going to react. And so didn't want to distract them from, it wasn't any kind of special swim meet or anything, but just didn't want to distract them for, uh, for this event.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, after it was over and, got my flights and stuff, told them that I was going to fly up Pittsburgh because her grandfather died, and they'd be coming up in a couple of days.
Okay.
So yeah, so logistics, right? Research and logistics seems to be a common
Yeah.
thing.
Well, for somebody who, it sounds like you're very on top of the ball, very type A, likes the good old fashioned spreadsheet. It probably was very difficult on the diagnosis to have so many unknowns, so many things that, like, maybe you never researched before, like you said, but also so many things that were out of your control. It's not like, oh, here are the numbers, like we can solve this math bar problem by putting
Mm-hmm.
in this variable. No, there's so many variables and so much out of your control that it was probably very difficult.
But also being across the country, that
Right.
was more frustrating. Because you look at families that are close together, and even if you're a hour away, you have the ability to drive and help out with any kind of appointments, or be able to sit in on the doctor's meetings if you want to. Um, being this far away, the that was what felt most out of control. Is that we're
Mm-hmm.
relying on my mom and my dad's feedback from the doctor's appointments, and they're elderly, right? They don't necessarily know what questions to ask or to ask questions about certain things.
Yeah.
And my wife is in the medical field. She's a medical professional. And so she knows a whole lot more than I do about the types of questions to ask and what to expect from these meetings, and when to push the doctors more, when to not, and things like that.
Mm.
So again, we tried the best we could through FaceTime, through phone calls, but again, not being there, being this far away, was probably the most frustrating part of that in that aspect of it.
Did you contemplate like moving back for a certain time period?
No, no, I didn't. That's kids are in middle school and grade school, late grade school now. At the time, we've got a lot of stuff established here,
Mm-hmm.
and so yeah, moving that far away, just it's not something
Yeah.
that was realistic.
So it sounds like your wife knew a lot of some of the questions to ask based on her background. Who else gave you support on the grief and emotional side?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm trying to think of of who it was, and I really think that what I dove into after his death with Reluctant Executor is part of how I am, how, let's see, how do I put it? Not to say how I'm coping with it. That's like too strong a word, but just like how I, where that support is.
Mm.
I feel like the support I needed was about helping my mom through all this stuff afterwards, and being able to then take what I learned and help others with that um, was more therapeutic for me. And as I've talked to more and more people who have struggled with the same thing, or even struggled more than I had because they hadn't had any kind of preparation or any kind of plan in place, being able to support them in a way is something that helps support me, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So your grief, your coping mechanism is by helping others.
I think that would be a good way to say that right now. It's it's like I said, I think one of my instincts was to dive into research, dive into what all is going to happen, what all needs to happen, how do you prepare, what all can you do, and um, that was probably one of the kind of the lost words, because I don't know. It seems odd. I'm trying to think of a person, right? You typically think of a person to help support you through everything,
Yeah,
or to
it was
lean on.
one of the resources, one of the distractions, maybe.
Maybe distraction, maybe maybe a good way. Yeah.
How did so you mentioned like you were a main resource for your mom as well, to help her both emotionally and logistically get through this. So how did how old was she when your dad passed, and what was her initial, like, I guess, reaction, response from a emotional standpoint?
Yeah, she's 4 years younger, so she was 75 when he passed away. Um, yeah, her responses was, again, not being there day in day out. It was hard to see, but there were definitely you know difficult times. I mean, it was kind of what you'd expect from losing your husband of 50 years. They just hit 50 years.
Wow.
Um, and there was a lot of uh, how does she respond? I mean, she did talk about going to the funeral, or going to the cemetery every day. Obviously, also, going to church, and it's it is what I think. Unfortunately, just kind of like a typical response. There wasn't anything super crazy, nothing abnormal. Just like somebody dealing with grief of somebody that now is living alone and has to, get by without their companion for the last 50 years.
Yeah. And I'm sure that probably the caregiving aspect, that might have taken a toll on her for a year and a half as well.
That was something I do remember. The night before he passed away, I don't think she had slept for like a week, just being up with him, and
Wow.
like kind of refusing some of the help. Not refusing help, but just not knowing how to ask or who to ask for help with. And also being that caregiver and feeling like I think it was her responsibility to take care of him through all of this when there were other resources. So the night before he passed away, they actually did move him into hospice. And I think my mom actually finally got some sleep that night. But then she woke up to, call with him passing away that morning. So, good for her to get some sleep, gets finally some, some things off of her plate with that, 24-hour care. But knowing that was, that waking up to that news was not the way you want to feel refreshed and the next day.
Yeah. So she woke up to that news, and you woke up to probably a phone call.
Mm-hmm.
what what happened next? I mean, you obviously decided not to tell your kids until after their swim meet, but logistically, you had to book a flight.
Yeah.
What happened next from
Yeah.
your point of view and her point of view?
Yeah. So the thing about logistically, like I said, we, booked a flight for myself. We had actually, now that I remember, we actually had a trip planned up there for later that month. It was for all four of us to go up to visit them, maybe do a little bit of other vacation around the area. Um, but, trying to figure out how to transfer, cancel those flights to make it sooner. I remember one thing, I'm usually pretty diligent on making sure I get the best flights in terms of cost, in terms of schedule and everything. I didn't care. I just booked whatever was most convenient in terms of time to get up there and cost, something I didn't even think about, which probably cost a few $100s at least in the long run across all four tickets. But again, something you're not even thinking about in that time.
It doesn't sound like you're losing sleep over the couple $100 now.
No, I couldn't even tell you how much it was, but I knew it wasn't efficient. That's what I do remember. Had to contact a company I was working for at the time for bereavement. That was another thing that, it's a whole nother topic we can get into on how company bereavement policies, but did, basically just, email my manager and let her know that, that my dad, like she had known that he was sick. And so let her know that he passed away and I was taking some time off. So I had to, after emailed that and then dealt with all the bereavement stuff, policies afterwards. Call family. That was another thing. There was a couple people, actually trying to think of who I had to reach out to because I didn't want my mom calling. She had to deal with other stuff. So I did call my cousin and let her know, who was my dad's brother. So close relationship there. So let her know so that she could tell her dad everything, and then make arrangements for them to fly to Pittsburgh for that as well. Those were the immediate things, and then just getting up there. Figuring out, do I rent a car? Do I have her try to pick me up from the airport? That didn't seem like a good idea either. So again, more, just whatever car's available, let me go grab something. And I did think ahead where I'd need to have enough space to fit my whole family in. So a little bit of planning and forethought into that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, just those type of logistics and getting up there. And I think I arrived, that was a Saturday. So I think I ended up flying up Sunday.
Okay.
And got there. I remember that night. And then that we just had to, at that point, I think my family, my wife and kids were flying up like 2 days later, I think, like day before the funeral. But at that point we just, just got there and, which just, I remember the one thing I remember, like kind of seemed like a priority at the time, was the obituary. That was something that my mom had given a bunch of information to, I don't know if it was the funeral home or who it was, I can't remember, but for them to write the obituary, they sent her a copy back and she was not happy with it at all. And so she was like an English major, she taught, and she tried to revamp it. And I'm like, look, just let me take a look at it. Again, going back to my marketing experience of writing emails, writing copy for web pages, trying to get that story out to the right audience. So I took a look at it, made some changes, and sent it back. And she was happy with those changes. She put her own. She wanted to have some of her own words in there also. So, but that seemed to be a priority when I got up there. That seemed to be like one of the top priorities. And that was a way I think that she was more, again, wanting to be that caretaker and wanting to, kind of have a say in how the announcement went out to the in the obituary.
Well, it's a very emotional priority, and it's probably something that she wanted to make sure was done right after 50 years of marriage.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And you look today and you see, like there's a lot of services that offer AI generated obituaries
Hmm.
for stuff. Again, a whole nother conversation, but the AI aspect, the tech aspect of writing something that is again so personal and that you have a lot of emotional attachment to, especially given how long the two of them were together. I think for any kind of couple um, or family for that matter,
Mm-hmm.
that's it's an interesting discussion to see how how people view some of the technology playing a role in things that are much more face to face, much more
Personal.
emotional attachment to. Yeah.
Wow. Um, and then you started calling family, and you didn't want your mom to call because she had maybe other more important stuff to do. I
Yeah.
guess, what did you mean by, or what other stuff was she doing? Was it logistic? Was it just giving her the time and space to grieve?
Just wanted to give her time and space. There, in reality, there were not that many people to call, and she was also probably a better person to call a handful of the close family or family that I don't even know about. But also, her sister was able, I think, to help a little bit with that as well,
Mm-hmm.
for that part of the family. But then there were, like, I think, two really good friends that lived out of state that my dad grew up with, that would always visit, that all three of them would visit each other. And so, that was, I think, also in a way good for her to talk to them and tell them herself instead of hearing it from me. Um, so essentially, I wanted to think through who else needed to know. And the biggest one I could think of was my dad's brother. And so that side of the family to kind of get the ball rolling with the communications to that side of the family and making sure um, it was important for, I think, for my uncle to be there to
Yeah.
fly in because he was also out of town, needed to fly in. And so, um, yeah, it was mostly about giving space, but also trying to not overwhelm her with just trying to think through a bunch of different people and be on the phone all day saying the same thing over and over and over again,
Right.
especially like that soon.
That makes sense. Um, and you also mentioned that you had to tell your work, who might have been expecting it, but talk to us about the company bereavement policy that was in place there, and maybe what you would have liked or preferred.
Yeah, I mean, I basically, so this was on the weekend. I opened up my laptop, sent an email to my manager, and just said, "Hey, this happened. I'm out. Um, like, send me whatever forms I need," and closed my laptop and didn't care about it after that. The policy, I'd looked at the policy beforehand. Their policy was if it was a local funeral, and so they also defined immediate family. So, like, immediate family and local funeral, 3 days. For an extended, if you have to travel, more than so many miles for immediate family, 5 days. So yeah, that was it. Fortunately or unfortunately, this was still this was 2022. There was still a work from home type of situation. Um, so let's see. I did fly up there. I did fly back within the week. I cannot tell you. I don't remember if I took time off that following week or not. I'm trying to remember the days. I think the funeral was on a Wednesday. I'd have to look. I think it was on a Wednesday. So I believe I flew back probably on Friday. Um, but even then, it was one of those things where you feel so bad. Like it's the everybody comes, offers their sympathy, offers their support in that immediate time frame, and then just like that, everybody's gone. And then you're like, my mom's dealt with they're just, all alone trying to get, everything back together, or just figuring out what's next, right? What this next step's going to be like. And that support is not, it's there, but it's not manifesting itself in the same way that you just saw a couple days earlier.
Mm.
So, and that's, one of the downsides of living far away also. But yeah, going back to the bereavement question, 3 or 5 days. And again, fortunate that it was a work from home time period. And so was able to get on the phone any time of the day if I needed to, without, any kind of, super, super repercussions.
Yeah. So you let your family know, flew up there, your immediate family, your kid, wife and kids flew up there as well, had the funeral, people paid their respects. You flew back to Texas, and then sounds like maybe took a day or two off of PTO because they didn't allow any other bereavement time, and then you kind of got back to work. I mean, obviously you were probably distracted a little bit or a lot of it, but
yeah.
What other immediate action steps did you need to take maybe in that following couple of weeks?
Yeah, that immediate time frame, it was, I think the getting the death certificates was one thing, right? I think I actually did get some copies of those before, while I was still up there. And I talked to some other people and realized that, like, that was one of the biggest things they said. Like, you need to have original copies of death certificates in order to get anything done. I wanted to make sure that I talked to their estate lawyer, that wanted to make sure. I was on the phone with him. Yeah, I was on the phone with him that week I was up there. I didn't see him in person though, but wanted to make sure what the requirements were in Pennsylvania for what they had to do for probate, what they had to do for, anything regarding the estate. And fortunately, it was it was all good. The way they handled it, just because it was a spousal death, there wasn't any kind of extensive crazy stuff to go through with them. Also not a crazy large estate or anything either. So I started thinking through, looking back to that spreadsheet and thinking through, okay, so now what? Now we have to do to get everything switched over, notifying companies, financial institutions, mostly I'm thinking about utilities, all this other stuff, that he's no longer on the account. He's no longer, it should all be transferred to my mom. So that was kind of the next step of what do we do? I think one of the first things I looked at was probably their investment accounts, brokerage and IRA accounts, and getting the ball rolling with that. Social Security was another one. There is a small payment. They call it a lump sum. It's like $200 that you get. But, kind of making sure that came. But I would say more importantly, Social Security also was, and I don't remember how long this was, but they were requesting that last check to be refunded to them. So for Social Security, my understanding is that they will pay if you're alive for the entire month. But even if you die on the last day of the month, then you have to return, if you've already gotten the check, you have to return it to them. So it's not prorated or anything. So yeah, if you die on the 29th.
That sounds like an antiquated system.
There's a lot of antiquated systems out there. But yeah, so making sure that was refunded properly. Just again, checking the accounts, making sure that all that went through. Got how, 2 cars. My mom, they both had a car. So what does she need? Both cars? No, which one does she want to keep? That was actually turned out to be a pretty big decision for her, to think about, like, her health and which car was better for her. which one was in better shape. And that took longer than I expected, also. And I don't know if there was some emotional attachment to that as well. But figuring out how to, well, first of all, which one to keep, and then helping her actually sell the car, because that was something my dad had always done, bought and sold the cars. I'm sure she shopped with him too, but I think he was the one that handled all the paperwork and negotiating and everything. So figuring out which car to sell and then how to actually go about and sell it. What else? Like I said, the accounts.
Well, you forgot a major detail. You had this conversation. Your dad was talking about the paintings. The paintings this whole time. We're all waiting to hear what happened to the paintings.
They're still with my mom. Okay. they're still there. Yep, they are. Yep, still displayed where they always have been.
Did you get them like reappraised for?
No, I think I did actually look up the artist and looked up like some of the the values of them, and they're maybe 100. So they are nice. They are nice paintings, though. They're nice countryside of Western PA type of paintings.
So it sounds like you really got to work on this. I have like two questions that was sparked. Take us back to like that conversation that you had maybe back in October, November of 2020, before when you got the diagnosis that your dad had lung cancer. Like what you asked a lot of questions. You're like, hey, what do I need to know? What was that conversation like? I mean, obviously you hadn't had this conversation in the past. You haven't dug into the details. Unfortunately, you had a little bit of time and mental capacity for all parties to be there and present for that conversation. But you got 60 to 70% of the information that you needed. What were the questions that you asked during that conversation?
Yeah. So again, I focused mostly on financial type of things, and starting I think with what assets. Like I knew obviously the house they had, cars. What what make and model do you have? Are they paid off? Do you have a loan on them? I knew they did not have a mortgage on their house, but getting the details in terms of insurance companies, in terms of the titles, like where are the physical papers located. If we need to do anything with these, we need to have the title for that. Start with that aspect. If there's any other kind of assets aside from the paintings, not really anything. Ask about their income. So Social Security, because of their age, how much was it? What account was it? How was it getting paid to you? It was getting direct deposited into one of their accounts. I think maybe my mom's was different from my dad's, potentially too. So I want to understand why they had it going to these different accounts. They both were teachers. They had a pension payment coming every month as well. Also going into potentially different accounts, if I remember right. But again, want to understand why. They told me that they used one of those checks, and basically everything else was just savings. Like they could live off of one of those. And like, okay, that's good to know, and that explains why certain ones are going to certain accounts. So not just understanding logistics, but also understanding why they did things the way they did. Next was probably what those accounts were. So going into checking, savings, those types of accounts. What were the account numbers? What banks were they at? What do they typically use these accounts for? And what credit cards? What do they use these credit cards for? Which credit cards do they have? What are their numbers? Just what's your, kind of what's your, do you pay them off every month? Do you leave, anything extra? Do you get reward points for anything? Those types of questions. Then went into the bills. And I do remember this one was asking, because I knew they had, cable, obviously cell phones, heating, electric, water, all that type of stuff. I'm like, okay, so which companies are these through? How do you pay them? And I remember them just pulling out like a stack of bills and just, reading through them. It's like from, bills that they had gotten for the past couple months, excuse me, and just reading through them and saying, like, here's the account number, here, take this if you want it, no big deal. And I think I had tried at the time to set up online accounts for them for like cable or maybe something else that they had, just so I could access it if I needed to here. Mm-hmm. We can talk about all the privacy laws and all that stuff later, but if I did need to get into something, so I could help them either cancel a service or find a better bundle or whatever it was, wanted to have that information in front of me instead of relying on my mom to relay information to me. And they did not have online accounts for I think anything. And so that was one thing that I did. I don't think I did that for everything, but if I could, I tried to set up the online account just to, again, help with anything that may be needed, because realizing that it's much easier for me to research and look at things myself versus ask somebody what the question, they'd go have to find out and then get that information. So just wanted to cut out the middle person and get that information. But
definitely.
But yeah, like I said, bills, what all they were paying, try to get a sense of what their average amount that they did pay was, just to try to also do a back of the envelope calculation to make sure that the checks that were still coming in for the pension payment and Social Security would be enough to cover everything. Knowing that his payments were going away, was there still enough? That's a big. I think a lot of families may not realize that they still have probably very similar expenses if they're not changing houses, not downsizing or anything, but yet your income could potentially be reduced in half. So, is there enough to still support what you need to do?
Unfortunately, it sounds like your parents were savers and they only needed one of the two pension checks.
Yeah, definitely. You could definitely consider them savers. Yeah.
I do want to circle back. So, like, I guess some people may be asking at home, what is a pension? A lot of people, private sector employees, may not have a pension. It's much less common in today's day and age, but really what it is a retirement plan similar to a 401k, but it provides steady income to retirees who are typically in public service jobs, government, military, unionized workers, and utilities. So if your parents or your grandparents may have a pension, you might want to look into that and gather the details like Bill did ahead of time to understand not just what, but why and what happens if one of them were to, God forbid, pass away. Do those checks continue, or does the survivor have to survive off of maybe not having those checks?
And another important thing, which we realized after the fact, this was one of the things that was really, a month or two after my dad passed away, was that the health insurance plan that they were on was paid out of, was part of the pension, part of that organization. So the pension, wow, they got their health insurance through there. So both my parents were teachers. They were part of the same pension program. My dad's check paid for both of their health insurance premiums. When he passed away, they just canceled the health insurance. So it did not even, they did not transfer to take my mom's portion out of her check automatically or even think about that. They just stopped sending the check. So health insurance stopped getting their premiums. And so my mom called me one day and she's like, I need help. I think my health insurance lapsed. And she was having, some medical issues at the time as well. And she was very concerned about obviously losing the health insurance. And so that was, you talk about being able to work from home. That was something where also I had been able to create an account online for the pension, look and see what I could find out, but also got on the phone with them, explained the situation, explained what happened, and got that resolved. One thing to note too is that they won't talk to you unless you're the account owner. So a lot of these calls, learn how to do, three-way calling on your cell phone. because I had to bring my mom on as well and say like, yes, she is the account owner. This is my son on behalf of me. Like he can answer any questions.
Yeah.
So,
Did,
but
did
yes, but
did your dad name you as the like executor of his estate as well, or was it your mom?
so when they both go, yes, I'm the executor once they both go, but the surviving spouse was if
Mm.
just one of them went. So
Okay,
I think
so it
she
sounds like you,
technically,
you you were supporting your mom. Really, you took on the role as both kind of like it's probate administrator as well as like financial planner, pre and post of the conversation to make sure, hey, do they have enough money? God forbid one of them weren't here. Are they going to be okay? Um, and then logistically, like where is everything? Let's combine. Let's automate. Let's get a look and a peek into everything to make sure that peek under the hood to make sure like everything's operating appropriately.
it was like I said, after the fact, there's things that popped up that we did not account for. The health insurance was one, which I don't know how we could have planned for that ahead of time either. That would have been, I think, a miracle to think of. Oh wait, well, health insurance is different. So that was one. I think the other big thing that we didn't realize ahead of time was that when we transferred accounts from joint accounts, which their checking savings accounts were all joint accounts, and investment accounts, also brokerages, to a single to take his name off of it, they transferred them to a single account, but also changed the account number. And so anything that was paid automatically, just auto pay, was broken. And so normally you'd think like, okay, cell phone or something like that, it's easy log in, just change the billing. The problem that we had was their HOA payment. And that one was automated and then broke, but the HOA did not have any kind of online system to go easily change it. And my mom had no clue how my dad had set that up earlier.
Mm.
So we had to basically, she had to, I guess, walk down the street to the HOA, to somebody that was on the HOA committee, and just ask them. I did look through their documents when I was there, the HOA documents that they had. Nothing talked about the payment that I could find. And so, she was finally able to get a hold of somebody on the committee to help give her some information. But not knowing that the account numbers change, and just in breaking that aspect of it before updating the other stuff was something that could have been prevented if we had known. But that was another, again, pain that you don't want to deal with when an unexpected thing that pops up. That's just a hassle.
Just a hassle.
Yeah.
Especially while your mom is grieving. She just lost the person that she loves and had been in love with and lived with for 50 years.
Yep. Yeah.
And it sounds like there's a common theme where your dad handled the cars. He bought and sold all the cars. He handled all of the HOA payments, maybe set up the bank accounts. I feel like it's very important to have both parties at the table, or at least have a baseline understanding of where things are and how things operate. And a lot of our, like, maybe that generation, it's not necessarily set up like that.
No, and you're right that I've seen that in a lot of other couples, where one spouse, typically the husband, is the one that knows, that handles everything. My parents were not to that degree. And what actually happened, I do remember as a kid, my mom would write the checks for all the bills as a kid. And then for some reason, she stopped doing that, and my dad started doing it. And I asked her at one point what happened, what that switch was. He retired from teaching a couple years before she did. And so he was home, and I guess he'd get the mail. And when the bill came, he just took care of it instead. So there was that transition, because he retired before she did,
Right.
and just ended up taking over. And I'm sure my mom didn't complain. And she wasn't completely out of the loop. She knew, a lot of the, obviously, the assets. They knew what they had. Just, probably not the details, not the day to day
Yeah,
type of stuff, or how he may have handled things
right.
specific ways.
As you were navigating this and dealing with it, um, the finances, the logistics, the emotions as well, who gave you advice on the money stuff for the logistics in the immediate aftermath? And was there any advice that you recommended or that you like think was good advice or some really bad advice? Was your company there to like support you in any capacity?
Not any capacity that I can think of. Um, the advice I got was probably, I'm trying to think back, just from research, just from looking online and looking at what some of the, what the IRA inheritance rules were. Um, I've been kind of a DIY type of person myself when it comes to finances. So I actually helped my parents with some stuff throughout the years in terms of what they should do with their 401 or their IRA accounts. Um, just some basic investment advice for that. And so I did have an idea of what they had. I had no clue about step up basis, how that would play into play into anything. So this was all this was all new to me, and I don't there was nobody saying, hey, this is something you should think about, this is something you should think about, step up basis, how does this really impact what you want to do with stocks. Um, Inheritance rules, like how do you, like, for a spouse versus a non-spouse for for an IRA inheritance. um, Tax filing, going from married filing jointly to single the next year. How does that impact things? Nobody was really there telling me, or giving me advice on this is what you should think about. And so I pretty much learned as it popped up. I knew would have to transfer again the IRA in his name to my mom, and so I just dug in and learned about the 10-year rule and all the things that are going on with those laws right now. Um, the Get step up basis. I go back to, that was an interesting one, and if that
Yeah.
is something. And do you want to explain the step up
Yeah,
basis?
I'll explain a little bit. Yeah, so I guess the IRA rules they changed in um, starting in 2019, and they're different if it's a surviving spouse that inherits a retirement account versus a non-spouse inheritance. So if Bill, your mom inherited the account, or if you inherited the account, the distributions that would be needed to be taken are different. Additionally, a step up in cost basis is for any taxable account. So um, brokerage accounts, checking and savings, home properties, stuff like that. That's not held in a retirement account. That the basis, the I guess basis is the difference between the value and what you maybe purchased it, or that helps calculate the gain once it's sold. The basis gets stepped up to the value on the date of death. And so, for highly appreciated stock or real estate, there's definitely some uh, nuances that you need to be aware of, and maybe some potential benefits that you want to plan for. But it sounds like, yes, investing, and with my day to day job, everybody thinks like, oh, I need to make sure I'm investing. I need to, like, yes, that investing is one piece of the puzzle, but all of these estate planning nuances, these tax planning nuances, these rules and distributions, and all of that, it's important to be aware of because it's all part of that financial picture and that financial health.
Yeah, and fortunately or unfortunately, whichever way you want to look at it, my parents did not have a complicated, complex estate at all. Not super high value or anything. So relatively easy for me to handle most of that. One area that I think we did mess up on, looking backwards, talking about the money aspect of things, was really taking advantage of being able to file married that year versus single the next year. And so there were a couple areas where she could have converted things for income at the end of 2022 and been able to pay a lower tax rate. But she didn't do it in 2022 and just got around to it in 2023 when the bracket shrunk for her. And so ended up paying a higher tax rate on things that could have been slightly lower.
That's a super helpful tidbit for someone who might be going through this. Is yes, the last thing you want to be thinking about is a couple $100 in taxes or whatever it might be, but these kind of nuances are important. You want to be aware of them because it could make a major difference in your life, and you might want to declare income when you're married, when you're filing married versus filing single the next year.
Yep.
Were there any other financial or logistical resources that you wish you had?
That I wish that I did have resources. There's still so much I'm learning right now. And just leaning on other people when I come across something to, figure out what the best strategy is. What kind of resources do I wish I had right now for that? So fortunately, or unfortunately, it's been, a couple years. So things have been winding down right now. What I'm doing now, though, is kind of preparing. My mom's getting up there too, right? And so, I know that time is coming. Hopefully, it's many years from now. But still, from what I know now, from the things I had experience with my dad financially, and how I'm understanding how things will be different, or when my mom passes away. And that's in the inheritance and how everything works when it's non-spousal transfer.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of what, going back to your question, what resources do I wish I had? Knowing these nuances, like you talked about, checklists are great, but the checklists that I've seen are very generic, very high level. They don't apply to your specific situation. And they also, I have not seen a checklist that touches on the things I've experienced. Like I said, like we talked about the step up basis, the
pension,
the healthcare aspect, the tax filing status changing. And how to take advantage of that. That seems to be a whole nother level of detail that everybody goes through. But yet, if you're, again, looking for just a generic search online, and you'll have a great checklist of make sure you get death certificates, make sure you secure the house if both people have passed away. Just some very high level, if you've gone through this once, almost obvious types of things if you've gone through it. But going to that next level, resources I wish I had would be something that's customized for my situation,
for my specific situation.
Yes.
Like a dynamic checklist.
Yes. Yeah.
AI isn't there yet.
No, I don't even know
just like the obituary, it's not going to provide a checklist that's dynamic and specific and unique to your personal situation. But
right. But there are enough. What I've come to realize is there are enough generalities that can apply that are still nuanced enough. Your specific situation within that general area is nuanced enough that you will probably need to seek advice. But be aware of that. Be aware of the changing tax rates or the changing tax brackets. Be aware of what a step-up basis could imply. Be aware of what the IRA rules are. Be aware that your account numbers are going to change when you change it from a joint account. What else? Those financially are some of the biggest things. Um, yeah, those are the resources that come to mind right now in terms of finances. We can get into like subscriptions, online accounts, like those types of things. Also, that's a whole nother area that can cause a lot of pain as well.
Yeah.
But thinking of the big bucket stuff, the things that are, I think, most impactful early on.
Was there anything that you wish you would have done differently throughout this entire process?
You always look and see that I wish I had known something sooner. Wish I had known about that earlier. The thing that would do differently is probably have all that information well ahead of time, even more ahead of time than I did. And then that way you get all those details much, much earlier. You can have those conversations a lot earlier. There's really no pressure. There's no distractions where you are thinking things are toward the end. It's just a conversation about something that's going to happen at some point. If you don't have those conversations early and something suddenly happens, you're really at a loss, right? For not being able to get those answers. Even in my situation, I said I was fortunate that we did have some time to have these, but it was still like that's not what I think he wanted to be thinking about. Right? He wanted to be enjoying the Steelers season, right, for another time, or still playing golf as much as he could. And so yes, it didn't take that long to have that conversation for them. I think for other families there could be a lot of complexities and more difficulty. Again, I was fortunate that my parents were fine talking to me about that stuff. That may even become more difficult for some families as things get closer to the end. So yeah, looking back, trying to have some of those conversations earlier, having those details earlier, paying more attention to things that he said, like in passing, that came back to bite us afterwards. One example of that is he had asked me and talked to me about a online ad blocker software that he got for his laptop. Something that I don't know how he found it, but he paid for it every year and it just blocked ads on the browser. It sounds like something out of like the 90s or 2000s or something, right? But he used it, and I know he had told me about it because he had asked me questions about it. I'm like, yeah, I guess whatever you want to do, that's fine. But didn't really pay much attention. A few months after he passed away, probably about 4 or 5 months, my mom got a bill in the mail, or like her account was charged for a subscription for this again. And we had already gotten rid of his laptop, wasn't really even working anymore. There was no need for the subscription. So I'm like, hey, he passed away. We have no need for this. Can you refund this, cancel this and refund the money? I thought everything was taken care of. A year later, after that, get another charge for it. And I'm like, what the heck is this? And it was the same thing. They had never canceled it. So I had to, and finally, I think I actually was able to talk to somebody and tell them what happened. And they did refund that year, but they would not refund the previous year. And what had happened was, because I contacted them by email, their policy was they could not close accounts unless it came from the account owner's email. So talk about an outdated policy and how you deal with legacy type of situations.
Yeah.
If an account owner passes away, technically, they're the only ones that are supposed to use their email. And so how do you cancel your account if they're not logged in anymore? So
yeah, it sounds like they pulled a fast one. They're like, haha, we circumvented the rules. Now nobody can cancel their subscriptions.
This was only like $100, but still that kind of stuff adds up, right? And so
But it also it's like a little jab, right?
Yeah.
Every time you get that bill, like, hey, it's another reminder. It's another like emotional toll. It's something else that you have to do. It's like it sounds like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, is the estate still open?
So the way that I guess it worked in this scenario was there was never, no probate, didn't have to do any of that. So there will be an estate once my mom passes away, that will have to go through that whole probate situation. But
Yeah.
this situation didn't have to have
But
fortunate not to.
so it sounds like you're still kind of picking up the pieces, and you're like maybe climbing up the hill, and then you get a bill like this back to back years, and you kind of slide down a little bit. You're like, shoot, I thought we handled this. There's just so many administrative
Yes,
tasks that,
exactly. And no, you're exactly right. That was the feeling a year later. Like this was resolved. And fortunately, I'm just the one that was handling this. My mom told me about it, and I'm like, okay, I've got this. Don't worry about it. But you think about somebody that may not be paying attention to their bills every month, and just like, okay, yeah, just whatever, pay the bill, pay the credit card or whatever, and just go from there. Fortunately, she looked through it and saw this and asked me what I thought it was. But you can imagine, for a family that doesn't look at that, that's 5-10 years potentially of paying paying this bill for something that you
yeah.
have absolutely no use for.
Mm-hmm. So insane. And what stood out to me as well was um your comment about some of the things that he mentioned in passing, including this software. Um, and that goes back to our original comment around listening. It's an active skill that you still need to hone in, but you don't know, even if you have year and a half, 2 years to spend with your loved ones before they pass, or maybe it's sudden like mine. It's important to listen and hear and kind of pick up some of those pieces.
That's a great point, because earlier I talked about how great I was at listening, and and now that I think about it, that's when you're prepared to listen, you can be a great active listener. But yeah, understanding that you have moments where somebody may be saying something important to you and neither of you realize it at the time, that's still a good opportunity to to turn it on, right?
It's a skill. Yeah, opportunity to use
that's a
that
skill.
skill, flex that muscle. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, we're guys though, so we have selective hearing. That's um.
Exactly right.
Were there any other questions that you wish you got to talk about with your dad? Maybe questions about money or life, questions you didn't get to ask.
Um, money stuff, not so much. Their stuff was I'm fortunate that their stuff was relatively simple, and we had been transparent with kind of what they were doing, what their financial plans were, um, for a long time. So that was pretty good. Um, something probably that we should talk more about, circle back around to coaching aspect. um, just, I think they did get to see, so yeah, I coached my girls in rec soccer when they were younger.
Hmm.
But, I never really talked to him about the ins and outs of how he dealt with the different kids, how he tried to motivate people, um, how he handled dynamics of a locker room and stuff like that. He had coached, like I said, he coached wrestling for a long time. He was assistant football coach, high school level type stuff. So, was around uh, that type of environment for a long time. And as a fan, you only get to see, or like a student or something, you only get to see the end result, right? You get to see the meets, the matches, but you don't get to see the practices. You don't get to see the locker rooms and what goes on there. Um, and from what I experienced, just even coaching 6, 7, 8-year olds, it takes a lot of um, a lot of skill to be able to keep them motivated, still make it fun, don't burn them out. Things like that on just how he did it, not how do you do something, right? How he did it for so long and being so successful at it. And I think he ended up winning like as a coach, 4 area championships, and I think he had like one or two state state finalists. I'm not sure if he ever had a state final winner, but anyway, he definitely had some good athletes come through, and still had to keep the team aspect together. So, how do you motivate the state finalist as well as the kid that's losing every match? You're on the same team. Skill level is a lot different. How do you set up your practices to, push both of them? A lot of things like that. He had decades of experience in dealing with that. That's something afterwards I thought about. That would have been a great resource to really pick his brain on what he dealt with.
Wow, he sounds like such an amazing coach, mentor, leader in the sports realm and in life.
Yeah, he was he definitely in the wrestling circles. Like there was a lot of people at the funeral that I had not met that were part of the organization that he volunteered at with the All-Star Wrestling meet. Nice. That introduced themselves to me and talked about what a great what a great person he had been, a great person throughout the with that organization and just in that area, in that community in Western PA.
Yeah. What are you doing now to honor his legacy and the amazing person that he is and was?
Yeah, so putting this all together, so we talked about bereavement leave. I did leave that company a couple of months after my dad passed away. I think that's I've read that's really common for that to happen. I started posting online on LinkedIn about some of these experiences, about issues that my mom and I ran into that we just, again, didn't expect. And it was almost a way for not to vent, but to kind of cope, right? To kind of grieve and help share my experience. And it turns out that there was a large number of colleagues and friends online that had gone through something similar. And so started hearing their stories on they wish, they had planned this better. Their father just passed away also, and he had to help their mom put basically what they call it, a user guide for their house together, just because they didn't know how to do a lot of stuff around the house.
Wow.
Things like that. And so realized that there was a much larger need for this. This was a common problem that people just don't plan, don't prepare, and need this help after the fact. And so about a year ago, I decided to go all in and start a company where I do help families with these types of tasks. So you mentioned owner of Reluctant Executor. That's the name of the company. And what I do now is I will help families, both. So one thing is after a loss, after a family experiences a loss, I will help them go through, figure out how to deal with all these logistics and administrative tasks that pop up after a loss, things that they don't expect. I will either do it for them if I can and if they want me to, or I will help research all the details that they need more than a checklist. I will go in and give you a step-by-step guide on what you have to do. So it saves you and your family hours of time doing that research where you just have to go do that. One example of that, recently I worked with a family whose mother passed away, and she had paper stock certificates. And so in order for the paper stock to get inherited, it had to be transferred to digital stocks that could be split up and put in the estate or whatever they had to do, but they had to get it transferred into a digital account first. And so the person I worked with, he was saying like, yeah, this is just taking a ton of time. I'm going down other rabbit holes. I get sidetracked so easily. Here, can you help me out with this? So, I was able to look at the information that he sent me about those stocks, figure out who the owning, the primary company was and what their process was, and just tell him the exact form, help fill out the form for him and where to send it. And basically had it filled out. All he had to do was sign it and send it into the company and have that taken care of. So that's just one example of, how I've helped a family recently with, taking a lot of stress off of you and giving you a lot of time back where you don't have to worry about figuring out all the details of how to get something done. I can do that for you. So that's on the after loss side, and then on the planning side, very similar to when I flew up to Pittsburgh with my laptop and the blank spreadsheet. I've worked with a number of families that where I offer a legacy planning, and I will sit down with the family and just go through a whole host of different things that they should be thinking about and documenting for their family. This stuff, this doesn't need to be, a year or a couple of years, before a loss. It's really beneficial. People in their 20s, 30s, 40s, nobody, if you're not sick, no health scares. It's a great way to get an inventory of your life, of your assets, not just of your assets, of your financial stuff, but really help understand your bills, your income, where things are. I think there's a lot of families out there, a lot of people out there that don't have a great handle on that. So this is kind of killing two birds with one stone. It helps you get that full picture of your financial situation, of your assets, of your primary contacts, of different things that you have in your life for an emergency. If something were to happen, it's already there, it's organized, it's documented. Somebody can pick that up and really reduce the stress that they would have if that wasn't there. But it also has the benefit of helping you understand that where you're at today, where everything is. Just a really good way to get that inventory, to get things in order, to get organized. I think that's the best way to put it. A good way to get organized for your financial life.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Amazing. So many valuable lessons of getting organized, having the conversations up front and in advance. Being like, when you're in this moment, there's inevitably going to be things that come up that you're not necessarily expecting. And I just love how you've turned this experience, this story of yours, into a business and an opportunity to help others and share your story with other people, and set yourself up to be able to help them kind of learn from what you did. And you're basically their dynamic checklist.
It's a checklist. It's a way, we talk about the coaching aspect, a way to help people at a time when I think they need help the most, where they don't want to be dealing with this. It's a way to help people just get back on track while offloading a ton of the crap that they didn't even expect.
Yeah.
And so giving them that space, giving them the time and the ability to focus on the things that matter, they're more important to them, versus this $100 charge that popped up that they have no idea what it is and have to sit on hold with customer support for 2 hours telling them their loved one passed away again.
Right.
So
again.
Yeah.
Well, Bill, this has been an incredibly impactful conversation. There's so many good lessons and takeaways. Do you have any grief mantras or words of wisdom that you'd like to leave our audience with to help them in their battle with grief or some of these logistical burdens?
what I didn't know is that there are people out there that can help. People that have gone through this before, whether it is somebody that has a business doing this like me, there are other professionals out there that do this as well. Or what I was surprised about, as I mentioned, is that the amount of people that when I started posting on LinkedIn that said they had gone through stuff similar, it's not something that's commonly talked about at all. So don't be afraid to share your story and what you're dealing with, because there is a really good chance that somebody else close to you or that you're talking to has gone through something similar. And so they can understand exactly what you're dealing with trying to get through on customer support or, getting accounts transferred. That's where I think I was very surprised at the level of stress and the level of pain that other people go through because they don't know that others are also experiencing the exact same thing.
Right.
So don't be afraid to talk about it, to share with people. Don't try to cover it up and say, oh, everything's great. We know that there is people that have gone through it know that it's not easy. There are so many things that are unexpected that pop up. And so don't try to hide it. Just, be open about it. And you would be very surprised at how many other people have gone through this and can probably offer some support or some advice maybe on how they dealt with it that could help you along the way.
That's amazing. You're 100% right. You're not alone. And that's one of the reasons of this podcast, is to bring these taboo topics that we're not talking about on a first date or at the dinner table or typically on LinkedIn, besides your LinkedIn and my LinkedIn, to the forefront of a conversation. And I love that grief mantra and words of wisdom is don't be afraid to share your story, because there might be somebody going through it as well. So Bill, thank you so much for being on the Currency of Grief podcast. I know people can find you on LinkedIn, but where else could they find you if they want to get in touch?
Oh, yeah, LinkedIn, just my name, Bill Solominsky. Just search for that on LinkedIn, or company where I also post a lot of these stories as well on the website is reluctantexecutor.com. So just, Google that and be able to see a lot more of the stories that that I experienced, and some tips for the dynamic checklist, as Justin mentioned, on what could maybe be beneficial for some of the listeners out there.
Amazing. You're such a wealth of knowledge and so resourceful. Thank you so much for the time, for being on the podcast, for sharing your story and getting vulnerable with all of us here. So many people will benefit from hearing this story, and we just appreciate you. So podcast family, this is another episode of The Currency of Grief. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's a great day to have a great day. So go have a great day, and thank you all for listening.